work, which our two magnificently dressed people here, Roel Cook and Zoe O'Sullivan, have spent a lot of time working on, and we have them to thank for it. I know they work for us, but they really work for us. They love their jobs, they love history, and they love exploring it with you. So please enjoy.
All right, everyone, so the first presentation that we're going to be showing you is by Dr. Karl Watts, who sends his sincere apologies that he couldn't be here today. He is a lecturer in the Department of History and Archaeology at the UWI Mona campus. He had a class to teach today, so instead of being here physically, he graciously allowed us to film him at UWI, so we're going to show the video. Now, if you guys have any questions for Dr. Watts, we're asking you if you can write them down, and with your email, give them to me, and I will try to get him to answer you and send you the answers. So ready for the video? So we're going to play the video now, guys.
Okay, good day. I'm Karl Watts. I'm a lecturer here at the University of the West Indies, UWI Mona campus. I'm pleased to be able to have a talk with you today about the legacy of the sugar plantation. I mean, we have come a far way as a people, as a Jamaican people, from the hellish days of slavery. But here we are speaking about its legacies and how can we address these legacies and how can we embrace them but also challenge them, right? Significantly to the point where we can actually chart a proper course towards full liberation as a society and as a country. So I'm here to talk about how the sugar plantation has impacted our daily lives. It continues to impact our daily lives despite the fact that it has declined as an economic force in Caribbean societies. So it is all pervasive, but it does retain an aura, or sugar plantations that is dichotomous. At once, there is the deleterious contribution to the social makeup of the Caribbean, characterized by a racialized hierarchy that became almost etched in stone following the clash of European and African cultures. And then there is a built environment, which became an almost permanent and static manifestation in the spaces we occupy. Everywhere you turn, a historic building is a reminder of the experiences of colonialism and slavery, the power structures that were in place that helped to cement the elite, the European elite and their stature, while reinforcing the lowliness of the enslaved Africans and their descendants. So the primacy of sugar in the 18th century compares favorably to cotton, in the 19th century and in the 20th century, and oil in the 20th century, as a product that transformed landscapes and led to a revolution in consumption patterns. Yes, we all have that sweet tooth. Try and imagine your life without sugar now, and by extension, sugary products. So to put in historical perspective, the sugar plantation, what it represents, should be no more as a central economic element in the Caribbean. So it no longer has a central place in our lives, economically speaking. We don't work on the plantations anymore, right? We don't slave for the buckra masters. That is myself as an African descendant and those who can relate to how I look as a black man. The Caribbean was the site of the first gold rush in the New World, right? The Caribbean, it became the crucible by which relationships were formed between different cultures, different regions of the world. So the centrality of the sugar plantation in the Caribbean economy is no more, despite the fiery clash of cultures between the Europeans and the Africans which took place. But it is no more, especially since the 19th century. We saw this with the decline of Saint-Domingue following the revolution in Haiti, emancipation in the British Caribbean in the 1830s, 1838 to be specific, We saw and then following that, the removal of protection for the planters, competition from Cuba and so on. A colony like Jamaica, which was at the forefront of plantation economics in the 18th and early 19th centuries, eventually faded out. Cuba was one Caribbean country which continued the rich legacy of sugar production in the 20th century, although following the breakup of the Soviet Union, the period 1989 to 1992, it experienced a notable decline in export income from sugar. But many Caribbean countries are now service-oriented economies, with tourism being the main engine of economic growth and development. And some countries have benefited from mining, oil in Jamaica, for instance, or oil production in Trinidad, Guyana, the latest example of that. So technically speaking, the notable changes, despite these changes that took place since the ending of slavery and so on, the sugar plantation still dominates the narrative about the nature of Caribbean societies. We should have moved past it. Why can't we? The sugar plantation was a crucible which shaped Caribbean identity. Any new venture with prominent foreign capital investment conjures age-old antagonisms along with promises of a glorious future as Caribbean societies seek to reposition themselves by reclaiming their centrality. Now the Caribbean is peripheral to economic developments on the world stage, unless one recounts the heyday of sugar production. I mean, one could also include coffee, but that was temporary because sugar is a centuries-long establishment. The decline was somewhat relative because increased capital investments there were many attempts to revive sugar in the 20th century in many Caribbean states, Jamaica being a primary example. For instance, in the 1960s, we did reach a capacity of 515,000 metric tons of sugar. If you compare that to the heyday of sugar where we were only producing 100,000 tons, you would consider that a major achievement for the industry. But even then, the world has moved on from us. Because at the height of our production, for instance, this is Jamaica, speaking of Jamaica, we produce, for instance, 101 to 105,000 metric tons in 1805. That represented the high point for the period of slavery, not just for Jamaica, but also for the likes of Saint Domingue and even Cuba, up until Cuba obviously took off and then became the primary producer. So the point is that even though we still found ways to revive the industry despite the decades of decline, the world no longer depended on its supply for sugar from the Caribbean. Right? So territories now that continue to produce sugar, we have the Dominican Republic, we have Cuba. They are still currently the largest producers. You have the likes of Belize and Guyana still involved. Jamaica, we still have a couple factories and so on. But we have to bear in mind that our economy is no longer geared in that direction. These are just some statistical figures just to drive the point home. So for instance, only 1% of favorable land is dedicated to sugar production currently, whereas at the height of slavery, most of the favorable land, especially on the low-lying lands, would have been devoted to sugar production. That is no longer the case. So why does it still hold such a central place in our culture, in our hearts, our minds? Why does it continue to dominate? For instance, we can no longer produce like Brazil. We can produce like Brazil 42 million metric tons a year. Even the 36 million in India, for instance, we are no longer at that level. So why do we still hold on to this particular entity in our hearts and minds and in our culture? I mean, we do have rum. We still has global appeal. Rum, obviously, the likes of Appleton, Worthy Park, they represent extensions of the legacy of the sugar plantation. This is world renowned. We must give it credit for that. Appleton Estate tours are well appreciated by locals and foreigners alike, all going back to the legacy of the plantation. It's now obviously a part of touristic appeal. Tourism is important to us, but why do we still continue to embrace these aspects of our heritage? So one thing that has to be impressed is upon us is the connection between exports and economic growth. And the value of our exports are crucial for development as we rely on foreign exchange to pay for imports. Another legacy of a space used for the extraction of resources during the period of slavery that all started with sugar production. Obviously, before we had other crops like cacao, indigo, tobacco, and so on, but sugar represented the crucial turning point in our history and the cementing of and how relations, social relations became cemented, economic relations became cemented, and so on. So economically, it cannot be overstated how the plantation economy dominated by crops such as sugar and coffee, limited the potential for development. Now we celebrate, you know, estates because of their long-standing history. You know, you look at the likes of Appleton, Worthy Park, but they were notable sites of oppression, which reflected a model of development that exposed enslaved Africans to the metaphysical and physical furnace as their ancestry was burned away while slaving in the fields or in the factories. After the purge, the memory was wiped, but there still remained a dogged cultural reminder of a homeland that resonates in new forms of Creole expression. Also, the notorious slave trade, which was a naked exchange of cash for human flesh, or on the plantations, devalued a workforce with the potential for greatness, unable to realize the value of their labor. In such a state of brutalization, the enslaved were left with a residual reminder of what is, what could have been, and the experiences that they had to endure along with their descendants for many years. Right, so true development was also curtailed because of the development of the plantation economy. Imperial mandates prevented colonies from truly exploiting the resources of sugar in the area of the refined sugar product, which was considered a threat to the metropole. Whereas although Saint Domingue was allowed to export refined sugar, territories in the British Caribbean, for instance, Jamaica included, were unable to do so. Preventing them from progressing to the secondary stage of industrial production impacted the perception of the colonies as backwaters or primarily geared for agricultural production, primary producers, sites of colonial extraction, as opposed to sites of colonial settlement and development. Caribbean colonies and states persist with the narrative by emphasizing primary industries or engaging in limited manufacturing enterprises. The economic lives of Caribbean peoples are determined by the volume of imports or faith in foreign products. What about faith in our own? The lack of confidence to engage in secondary production at the highest levels outside of the food and beverage sectors, clothing, etc., means that the limitations imposed centuries ago still persist. Not in policy today, but in the approach to development to transcend the peripheral status. Now we have to import development. We have to import consumption patterns. We don't lead the charge anymore unless it is in the areas of culture, entertainment, sports. We'd have made a case for ourselves to remain relevant, but reclaiming our central place has become very difficult. So, will we be able to take the next step in terms of development, or will we simply remain an agricultural people? We try to skip stages by importing development from overseas, but we need to also demonstrate our own capacity for innovation and mass production of advanced manufactured products to break the shackles and perceptions of our lowly status as peripheral countries in the economic order. And as I stated earlier, we have retained some relevance based on our culture as Caribbean peoples. But socially, how are we going to address the negative racial hierarchies forged on the sugar plantations? After the sugar revolution in the Caribbean, during the period of slavery, the lowly status of blacks or individuals from Africa and their descendants became fixed because of their classification of slaves to serve the white European elite. The colored groups are a product of the combination of black and white, and they too sought to separate themselves from their African origins. The position of black people within the Caribbean was inextricably linked to the lowly status of the enslaved. Despite the emergence of a Creole culture, anything related to African origins or African culture was frowned upon, as many sought to embrace the elite European culture as a form of accommodation, language, dress, and so on. Even to this day, black people are brought into conflict with their own skin color, and even though the scale of the sugar industry has diminished, it has stained the perceptions of Caribbean peoples. A negative perception that has diminished or limited our potential for full expression because of the assimilation of white culture as elite. So when are we as Jamaicans, for instance, going to make patois an official second language instead of laughing while we watch people recite certain passages in the Bible, for instance? But anyways, many have come, Marcus Garvey obviously, following slavery and emancipation to emancipate black people from the state of mental slavery or an inherited inferiority complex. But while some have been liberated, it is clear that there is more work to be done, as so many still cringe in shame at embracing their African roots or the color of their skin. So instead of loving the brownings, we can love the black women even more. Culturally, we have embraced various aspects of Creole culture, which are now celebrated worldwide, such as in our music and so on. And for that, we must take credit. But some elements, the negative elements, still remain. All the negatives experienced by people of African origins dates to the sugar plantation of the 18th century, which was a crucible that forged the racial hierarchy and cemented in our cultural and physical landscape the revolutionary price to pay for renouncing the ideal of the plantation economy was high, as Haiti experienced when it led one of the greatest revolutions in world history. So while others merely settled to accommodate with the structure and so lose their ability to truly make a difference to the negative ascriptions placed on Africans and their descendants. So, while I conclude, the sugar plantation has declined in stature as an economic force in Caribbean society, but historically and culturally it still retains a central place in our lives. It is a conflicted position, not easily resolved, but we have to forge a new identity which will reject the largely negative influence, yet retain a Jamaican identity which benefited in some way from the merger of European and African culture. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Watts. Now, just to let everybody know that, unfortunately, the next presenter, Mr. Karl James, he's running late today, so apologies for that. So until Mr. James comes, we're going to just move on with the program, and I'd like to invite Dr. Suzanne Francis Brown to the stage, who is an honorary research fellow at the University of the West Indies, Monash campus, and a great colleague here of us at the Institute of Jamaica, who has worked very closely with us, and we're very grateful for her to take her time out of our busy schedule to be with us today. So everyone, please welcome Dr. Francis Brown.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Okay, so I'm going to be addressing a somewhat different focus in relation to bittersweet sugar. and that is some of the absences that have come about because of our experience of sugar, which Dr. Watt was just talking about. So sugar is a special substance. Adding it makes tasteless or bitter things sweet, and this quality created the demand that made Jamaica famous in the 18th and even the 19th centuries. Yet so ironically, the production of this sweet substance caused some bitter outcomes, whereby sugar's impact on us over the centuries has been overwhelming, not just as an economy, but as a society. This presentation is about the loss of individual histories inherent in the nature of enslavement, that system that underpinned the industrial production of sugar in Jamaica over centuries and left impacts beyond emancipation. One consequence is that we know about the conditions under which people labored, in part because it was a subject of debate and discussion in an attempt to get the best returns. But we know very little about the people, because that knowing and those people were not considered important beyond their labor. This reality created acknowledgement and documentation gaps that affected the overwhelming majority of Jamaicans at some point, even more so if they did not engage with religious institutions and precepts which had strong roles in record keeping. So this talk will also recognize those threads of information that can help to reweave some of the torn life tapestries left behind by sugar. So I'm going to start with some quotations, and some of them you know, right? And this one is kind of a given. You know, Marcus Garvey spoke about the importance of our history, our knowledge of self. Then there are some others which speak the trajectory of what I'm going to be talking about here today. Here is Professor Kenneth Morgan talking about the fact that though Jamaica was not a monocultural economy, so it wasn't sugar, the agricultural and commercial life was largely based on slavery and on sugar cultivation. Then Professor Barry Higman, that's a name some of you may have come across. He's written a lot about sugar, who spoke about the fact that the people who did the hard work of the plantation remain essentially voiceless in the narrative and reduced to the tools of capital and themselves essentially considered human capital. Some of you will also, if you're doing history, be familiar with Liberties Lost by Beckles and Shepard, and they paraphrase Professor Orlando Patterson in his Slavery and Social Death, speaking about the main feature of slavery being that it cut off the enslaved from family, lineage, community, and heritage. And the fourth quotation that I have in my head as I speak to you is from Reverend Luther Gibbs, who was a Baptist pastor, very well known in the Baptist church some years ago, who said that parents did not tell their children anything about themselves in years after slavery. And the reason for it was that they didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to talk about the past. They didn't want to talk about the stigma attached to it. He said those were dark days. So with that in mind, what I want to do is very briefly sketch our sugar story to arrive at its entanglement with slavery and the gap in the personal and community history for those, the overwhelming majority, who were only viewed as muscle. I will look at the records which do exist and how they might or have been employed. So let's start with sugar. Others will have a lot more to say about sugar. Dr. Watts already did certainly will. Just for context, I want to note a few things. The sugar industry was introduced by the Spanish in the 1500s, but developed as an industry with enslaved African labor in the 1600s. Remember that the English came in 1655. So by the late 1600s, sugar is big. There are 775 sugar mills serving their own plantations, and there's a total population of about 209,000, of whom 199,000 are enslaved people. 1790, there are about 814, so you can see the growth, sugar plantations island-wide, and James Robertson maps them, a map that was published in 1804. And by the end of the 1700s, the start of the 1800s, Jamaica is the leading producer of raw sugar with about 20% of global production. 1807, don't want to forget 1807, the end of the transatlantic trade in enslaved Africans. And 1817, when the first slave returns, and we're going to talk about slave returns as an important source of information. By 1817, there are about 345,000 enslaved people in Jamaica when they are first named in a census. 1834 to 1838, abolition, apprenticeship, emancipation, followed by indentureship. In the late 1800s, we have abandoned estates, the end of the English sugar duties, and falling production. There is some retooling and revival in the 1900s. Dr. Watt spoke about the fact that by 1965, we have our highest ever production figures, and then since then, falling production to where we are today. So what I'm going to be doing is staying on the period when sugar and enslavement went hand in hand, though always recognizing that enslavement and its impacts extended beyond the sugar estates to those growing coffee, pimento, cash crops, raising livestock for the sugar and other properties or for food, or to those selling or using labor in every arena. This is that 1804 map by James Robertson that I mentioned. And if you could see closely and down in the left-hand corner, every estate is actually shown with an icon that indicates what kind of mill they had. Was it water? Was it animal? Was it wind? So our focus will stay not on the crop, but on the wrenching loss of personal family history for those whose lives and labor were tied to it. Geographically separated from families within Africa and forced across the middle passage of the Atlantic Ocean, most enslaved people born on the African continent then lost their names, along with all sense of familiarity with culture or landscape. This virtually uncrossable gulf that enslavement created was built upon over decades or centuries by a system that cemented dehumanization. By generating only such slim records as the enslavers required, the system also sowed little seed from which strong family and community histories could grow. The most consistent location for information on enslaved people was the private estate or business ledgers containing annual inventories, and I have a page from one such inventory here. In the case of large estate, this usually included information on gender, on age group, on occupational assignments, and health status. So people were categorized according to whether they were able or whether they were weakly, right? Not weakly as in the days of the week, obviously, but weakly as in strong or weak. There was sometimes also further details. So for instance, if you weren't well, whether you were confined to the Yaws house so that you didn't spread diseases to other persons. Ledgers also recorded annual increase. An increase was births, purchases, gifts, exchanges with related properties, and decrease, deaths, sales, transportation, or other permanent dispensation. Sometimes these records could record more than the minimum, such as decrease records that didn't just say that somebody died, but also spoke about what they died from and perhaps even their state of mind that led up to their death. So this kind of information is sometimes contained in these estate ledgers and in estate correspondence. And where these have survived and are accessible, where we can find them and use them, they provide the most detail about enslaved people living in those situations as individuals and as communities. These records also provide information on families, most frequently only information about the connection of mother and child, since the law enslaved all progeny of an enslaved woman. But in a few instances, there's also evidence of fatherhood. These were private records. They were not in the public domain. If they survive, many of them still are not in the public domain, but a few have been located and have informed scholarly or more broadly targeted histories, and I'm going to mention a few of those in a little bit. Then, in the context of a push for abolition, first of the transatlantic trade, the British government required colonial administrations to require the local registration of the enslaved population, starting in 1817 for most of the British Caribbean. The major aim was to undercut likely smuggling of further enslaved people into the territories. The Jamaican Assembly accepted a watered-down version of legislation earlier imposed in the Crown Colony of Trinidad, with individual entries covering name, age, origin, and origin means were you born in Africa or were you born in the Caribbean, and in which case you were considered Creole. Also color, and there were distinctions, grades of color. So when we talk about black and brown and all this, there was actual distinctions, Negro, Sambo, Mulatto, Quadroon. Some of those names have stuck with us, some of them have disappeared. And then also these records included the identity of the mother if she was on the same property. Other proposed categories that were not finally included in the Jamaican Act included occupation, physical stature, and bodily markings. A lot of people who came from Africa came from various tribes and they had tribal markings. In Trinidad, those were noted. In Jamaica, they were not. After the initial census, subsequent triennial, every 3 years, triennial updates use the same categories of information, but only required entries when there was an increase or a decrease, a birth or a death, a sale or a purchase. Transportation, runaway, all of those things would be noted. So these records, and this example is for the Papine Estate in 1823. These records were termed slave returns, and they were later compiled into registers, which are now perhaps most accessible on Ancestry.com. Some of you might be familiar with Ancestry.com. There is a free section that includes some of these documents, and they are referenced as the slave registers of the former British colonial dependencies. The UCL, University College London, Legacies of British Slave Owning database also have some of these records. But I just want to really underscore that these were private ledgers, and it was the private ledgers that informed these returns. So the public documents were informed by private information. So from 1817, with or without the private ledgers, we have a fairly comprehensive listing of people enslaved on the island in the public domain, albeit with even sparser fields of information for each individual than were recorded in the estate records. Before 1817, if the source ledgers, those private records, cannot be located and accessed, the enslaved individuals will reference, vanish into historical limbo. Lack of order. Any of you ever watched the Avengers Infinity War, where Thanos snaps his finger and half the world disappears? Kind of has that. Exceptions to this limitation in terms of where you can find information about people might include, though not in large numbers, those who contravene their forced conditions sufficiently to be described in runaway advertisements or to be mentioned in dispatches from the local administration to the colonial office in London, or in later instances in slave court evidence. Probate inventories attached to wills also named all property of the specific testator, the person who wrote the will, including enslaved people, but those only listed on monetary value. There's no information about the people, all right? I should mention that in seeking to understand the lives lived by enslaved people, there are several historians who have drawn on the writings of persons operating and living in Jamaica and other locations at the time of slavery, like the infamous Thomas Thistlewood, who was here in the 1700s, who maintained a detailed journal of his dealings with the enslaved people over whom he had power. Edward Long, who wrote a very, very famous history of Jamaica in the late 18th century, the late 1700s, was unabashedly racist, but also very detailed and provided.
This is gonna be our official camera.
And then there are others like an Irish overseer named Benjamin McMahon,
Oh,
who
we don't
wrote a
want them
book
to hear
called
us talking.
Jamaica Plantership in 1839 to record his experiences with enslavers during the 18 years he worked on the island. Combining these, albeit sparse registers, with the broad public records of the time, skewed as those may be, to the needs and desires of the dominant free and largely white population, does enable some illumination on the lives of some enslaved people. These public records included newspapers, the records of the church, and they were mainly very, very limited, but they were still important when you add them all together. The island-wide records of the Church of England variously recorded the engagement with religious ritual, be it baptism and eventually marriage, by enslaved people, whether because they wanted to and they were permitted to by the people who enslaved them, or because the property owners initiated a system where everybody went and was baptized, all at the same time, okay? So the record that is up here on your left-hand side is an example of the Church of England registers. The one over there is an example of the slave returns that I mentioned. So what can it be used for? What can we do with it, despite this sparse nature? Significant archival collections of estate records for some former estates have been analyzed in academic or less formal histories, shedding light on the estate functioning as well as the enslaved population to various degrees, sometimes beyond emancipation. In one of these cases, the case of Woodside in St. Mary, the focus has also been on the creation of a community history. My own work on the Papine estate in St. Andrew has involved memorialization, participating in efforts to return the names of the enslaved to the land on which they labored, but has also recently been more focused in trying to understand more about their lives in the shadow of the Mona Papine Aqueduct on what has become the campus of the University of the West Indies, Mona. And this effort has been proceeding even in the absence of those important estate ledgers and correspondence. So what I've been working on is interweaving the remaining records, the slave returns, the baptismal and marriage records, the newspaper ads, the official documentation, planter testimony and reports of inquiry, to shed some light on these lives. Now, some of you know Papine. Some of you know the Papine estate. Some of you might have visited the university. The estate was formed around the mid-1700s with about 187 people enslaved there in 1783. That went up to 226 by the 1820s, and then fell steeply as the owner, James Beckford Wildman, had people redeployed to his low-ground estate in Clarendon, and to a lesser extent, the Salt Savannah estate in Vere, which of course is a parish that no longer exists. He planned to convert Papine from sugar to livestock, also growing varied crops, which required fewer laborers. At the end of slavery, he applied for and was compensated for the loss of labor of 142 people formerly enslaved at Papine, then newly free. In its early years, the entire estate village clustered around the brick and cut stone aqueduct that bisected the estate and fed the watermill in the nearby sugar works, in direct sight of the overseer's house. Archaeology, which is the study of material remains of human civilizations, a lot of the time they dig in the dirt for what they find, tells us that over time, the Papine people moved west. They shifted their houses west past the aqueduct so that they were no longer in direct sight of the overseer. It also shows us some of the remnants of some of the common and not so common items that they used in their homes. The slave returns then give us a snapshot of those enslaved people who lived at Papine in 1817, one that can be enriched by searching the Church of England St. Andrew Parish records for the dozens of baptized individuals from the estate whose new names and surnames are in several instances recorded alongside their previous, what would be considered a slave name, one single name. These new names would follow them to freedom, but our capacity to link the new name to the old name allows us to follow them back. I should add that there are some estates and communities where other religious groups, such as the Baptists, the Methodists, the Moravians, were actively baptizing, but at Papine, the property owner was a strong supporter of the established church and actually brought missionaries onto his estate by 1826. But before those missionaries came onto the estate, there were some interesting occurrences at Papine. During a 6-month period between May and November 1824, at least 10 pairs of persons, 10, out of the 220 people then enslaved at Papine were married in the Anglican Church. This is in 1824. 3 more couples followed their example in 1825. So within a year, something like 13 people, 13 couples, 26 people were married on this one estate. They weren't the first, but certainly they were the most. And for comparison, on the Mona estate adjacent to Papine, which is about the same size and population, there was 1 marriage as early as 1816, 2 in 1819, 1 in 1824. So 13 marriages in 1 year on 1 estate was a lot. Consolidating the limited information available from these various records supports the generation of family trees for some of these families and for some others enslaved at Papine going back half a century. Of course, there are challenges at Papine and elsewhere. One is that between 1818 and 27, the Anglican Church, or certainly in the parish of St. Andrew, separated baptisms of enslaved people from those of free people. And not all the registers of enslaved baptisms have been located. So there are some gaps where we can't find those records. Another challenge involves relating the new name, surname, created at baptism and used on marriage to the previous single name, as I mentioned. Thankfully, in the case of Papine, this is not such a problem. If the public record or where available, the private ledgers did not capture that shift, there is a chasm that we are looking for, that we are looking back at, that we cannot bridge. But thankfully, there are cases where we actually can bridge those spaces. At Papine, many name changes were noted in the 1817 baseline return, which I showed you before, or in subsequent triennial returns. So we can sometimes follow people through various life, relationship, and locational changes during the period from 1817 to 1832, the last year of the returns. Nonetheless, the consolidation of available information, despite the challenges, the consolidation of available information can help to illuminate some of the individuals and families who formed the community near the aqueduct in the shade of the ackee and mango trees, whose regular crops would have been part of the food security for those living at Papine. The marriages and hence evidence of nuclear families aside, the Papine records also offer an unexpected bonus, solid indications of families formed between a group of African-born men and women acquired to Papine around 1821 from another St. Andrew estate, and implied evidence of fatherhood. Some of these men and women were among those married in 1812. So I'm going to show you very briefly some of those family trees that I've been able to put together. I'm not going to stop on the first couple of slides. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them. And I'm going to stop very briefly on 2. This is the first one. Darby and Gillette were the names that they originally had, and they were baptized and took new names. Darby became Michael Geoghegan, I'm told is how it's pronounced, though I'm tempted to just go with the way it's written and say Geoghegan. Gagan, okay. And Gillette likely became Sarah Williams, who married a man named William Michael in Papine in 1824. And by using the records, we're able to come up with this small but multi-generational family tree for these 2 people. Between them, they had 3 children. Romeo, who took the name Samson Gagan, William, and Sarah. And the family, William Michael, who Gillette married when she became Sarah, he died at Papine, and then the family was moved, the rest of the family was moved to low ground. I mentioned that that Wildman sent people to low ground in Clarendon. In low ground, Sarah, who becomes Sarah Michael, marries a wagon maker named James Harris. They were both of low ground at the time, and Sarah dies age 68 in 1875 in Clarendon. So she has moved to Clarendon. Between them, they have 2 children. What this is telling me is that there is a history which is not lost. Okay, so this is one example. I want to show you a second one. This one relates to a family that has a longer time at Papine. These are Creole people. They're not African-born. They did not come to Papine or to the Caribbean in 1800. The woman who is the matriarch of this family was born at Papine somewhere around 1752. She's one of the earliest children probably born there. Okay, her parents were probably Africans from Africa. All right, so this group of people from the very early years of the estate, it's actually possible to trace children for Patty Williams, this woman who is the matriarch, trace children for 2 of her 3 surviving children, and at least 1 great-grandchild by the time that slavery was overcome in the late 1830s. So one of the other things I thought was kind of interesting is Harry Henry, who is one of her children. He was baptized. That's actually a detail from the baptismal record. And he's baptized alongside a little boy from another estate. That child is the child of a woman living at an estate called Unity Pen in St. Andrew. And you kind of have to wonder, remember that people were able to go on a Sunday to the market to sell their goods, but also to socialize. And so perhaps that's where he met Charlotte, who is the mother of young Thomas. Okay, and perhaps they continued to form a family. I haven't got as far as that beyond his birth. But the fact of the matter is that this is 4 generations of persons in the crucible of slavery when so much was lost. So then, to wrap up very quickly, using what we have. So in addition to enriching scholarly discourse and more publicly engaged interpretation, such as digital history projects, some of which are linked to some of the books that have been written, such records may have a potential use in dredging for clues to family histories, cataclysmically impacted by slavery and especially by the industrial plantation variety of slavery. I once discussed, as I mentioned before, the baptism of enslaved people with prominent Baptist pastor Reverend Luther Gibbs. And as I mentioned at the beginning, he said parents didn't tell children anything about themselves. You didn't ask questions about where and when you were born. When you ask where you come from, they say you come from over the hill. They don't want to talk about the past. There was a stigma attached. Now more and more people are using whatever records may exist to try and find their way through the wasteland of sugar-driven slavery, to reconnect with a sense of being personally as part of a long history, even if it is a painful history. These are celebrities for the most part on a program called Who Do You Think You Are? Many of the people who are looking are not celebrities. They are people, in a sense, following Marcus Garvey's advice to look to your roots. Let us recognize that there are some tracks across the wasteland that sugar and slavery made for the many hundreds of thousands of people directly engaged in its production and for any of their descendants seeking to reclaim their personal histories. It is not a magic bullet. But for almost everyone who was still enslaved in 1817, some records exist, slight and slighting as they may be. And where there is access to the private records of the enslavers, further information can be teased out to amplify this archival window of opportunity. Hence the imperative to capture and understand the records, and that includes identifying and securing even copies of those surviving estate ledgers and correspondence, which hold the only consistent personal and contextual information on enslaved people for the period before the institution of the 1817 census of enslaved people. Those hundreds of thousands of people then enslaved across Jamaica, the majority in thrall to sugar. That is a crusade I believe we need to embrace. Thank you so much for your attention.
Just to let everybody know that I hope the students have been taking notes. I see the St. Hilda's girls have out them notebook. I none about the Georges boy them. I see like one or two have out notebook. But like some of the things that Dr. Francis Brown said, I know are on past CSEC papers. I know, I come out here for, field trip vibe, but this is educational, all right, guys? So please, I hope you're taking notes, because this is on the CSEC curriculum. Just to also say, thanks to everyone who's stuck online. The technical issues, praise be, have been worked out. Apparently, on the live stream, they only could hear us, not see us, because we have a lot of local guests online, as well as quite a bit of people as far away as England, the International Slavery Museum in Liverpool, and other institutions. So thank you very much. I know it's late in London with the time difference, so thanks again. But also to kind of, just to tell you my personal experience, what really resonated with me, what Dr. Francis Brown said, is about records. Now, I had the privilege of having a cousin in England who was able to access the archive, Legacies of British Slave Ownership. And he was able to send this to my family to show that I am a descendant. I mean, as even Dr. What's it say, you still have to give love into the brown in them. I'm brown for a reason, because I am a descendant of an enslaver who owned 13 slaves. And what was interesting about my family records is that we were able to see that even though we were very unaware of it, that some of the names in my family have been around since before 1836, which was when the will was entered into the archive. So for example, names like Elizabeth, my brother is named Nicholas. I have a bunch of cousins named Elizabeth, Charles, all of those things. So if you guys have any family in England, or if as Dr. Francis Brown was saying, you can get access to these archives, it really puts a lot of things into perspective for you and your family, of where you come from. So that being said, thanks again, Dr. Francis Brown. And I'd like to invite Mr. Karl James. We very much appreciate you, sir, for making it today. So if Mr. James, if you could just please come on stage. Mr. James is the past president of the Sugar Association of the Caribbean, and Mr. James has decades of experience dealing with sugarcane in Jamaica. So again, if you have any questions, please write them down. We'll have the Q&A afterwards. And again, everyone online, please keep your questions in mind and write them in the chat, and I will, as I've said earlier, well, you couldn't see me, but now you can see me. I will ask them on your behalf to the presenters. So please, everyone, welcome Mr. Karl James.
We still listening now. We can see. Okay. The audience can see, sir. Enjoy.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My apologies for coming so late. I was just explaining that I won't tell you my age yet, but I'm over 80, and I play tennis in the morning. But when I get back home from 6 o'clock, I play until about some to 7 to 8. When I get back home and shower, I have a problem. If I sit I'm going to sleep. So you're victims of my sleep this morning. I was sure that I was ready. And my housekeeper said to me, it is something to 9. And apparently I forgot what she told me. And then I came down. My daughter-in-law practices over at my church. So I called and told her I'm going to park over there according to instructions from Zoe. I passed the place and went to the next parking. And the gentleman, I explained to the gentleman, I said, all right, so come. Let me put you in there. Put me on a covered parking. So when you get to my age, a number of things happen, but people are very understanding. Very understanding. And as was told a while ago, I worked with the sugar industry for about 40 years. And I got involved at the part where I was doing the marketing of sugar for the entire Caribbean. It also provided me with an opportunity to travel all over the world. And yesterday, I picked up a piece of information that I didn't know before, is that the international date line passes through an island way out in the east. Anybody knows which island it is? Huh? The international data, you know, it makes it all Russia down. Fiji. You know where Fiji is? Out past Australia going out there. Anyway, I had my first international visit to Fiji and was really shocked to see what happens down there. Fiji remained one of the last sugar-producing entities that uses the small line railway to transport the sugar cane across the country. The other one was St. Kitts in the Caribbean. That one is still operating, but it now transports tourists, while Fiji is still transporting cane. So I accepted this invitation just because of my love for sugar. I got into sugar in 1986, and I have been in it since. I retired officially in 2018, but they won't allow me to go on my merry way. So they called me for all kinds of assignments. My last one was down in Guyana and in Barbados and Trinidad. I listened to Doctor's presentation, and I was amazed. And what hit me was, as the general manager of Jamaica Cane Product Sales, I had to work with the All Island Jamaica Cane Farmers Association and the Sugar Manufacturing Corporation of Jamaica. And they always come up with quarrels. So we had Mr. Buchanan from Westmoreland would get up in a heat in the meeting and curse the directors from Worthy Park that they were slave owners, and he would curse them. But then when I listened to the presentation, I realized a lot of information was kept up at Worthy Park, and that's why Mr. Buchanan was able to have information to cost Mr. Clark. So I took a keen interest in what they were saying and what they were doing. And while I did the work of marketing sugar, molasses, I didn't market rum. They said that is a separate business. I also had an opportunity to travel and look at what sugar estates involved. And one that I will slip in before I go into my presentation. You have to forgive me, I'm an old man now. I went to England, and there is a company, a family by the name of DePaz. They are connected with Lascelles. Mr. DePaz formed a sugar brokerage with his son Philip. And Philip invited me to the home one weekend. When I went there, I was struck. You know, all these prints about the sugar industry, about slavery, he had so many of them that in the house, they were along the wall, on the ground, upstairs, and on the wall, as many as Mr. DePaz is one of those, I think he's still alive, of those owners of activities in Jamaica where he made his fortune. He has a horse stable, and he had to allow people in England to visit his house, like on a Sunday. He had to allow them to come in and see. When I saw the collection, I said, my God, one man has all those prints of different aspects of the sugar industry. But he did. He had it, and he had to share it. And I was happy when Philip, he's now my good friend, allowed me to go. Some of what I have has been said already. For instance, the introduction of sugar by the Spanish. Spanish introduced sugar cane growing. And the first sugar estate was built in Seville in 1534 by Pedro de Manuelo. He also imported 30 Africans who were supposed to have sugar cane processing skills, and so they produced sugar for local consumption, while all previous production before that was for export. Another interesting Spanish connection was they called the Queen of Spain Valley in Trelawney, which had developed, and my first job when I left high school was to work with the collector of taxes in Falmouth. So I got to know some of these places, plus a gentleman that they referred to, Mr. Osmond Hillock, who was a very outstanding cane farmer down in Trelawney. According to A.C. Barnes, who was a director of research for the sugar manufacturers of Jamaica, the country provided early information of the sugar industry production. It was done specially for export to England and reached the amount of 14,700 tons in 1699. He reported that production data did not become available for 200 years, all earlier records being in respect of exports. In other words, they only tell you what we export, and that by when Doctor referred to the fact that we were the earliest, we were one of the biggest exporter of sugar in the early days. And they exported sugar in all kinds of ways, including what they call puncheon. You don't know anything about that. And then when I was researching, I discovered that all the sugar estates that were in Jamaica, and there's a time when they had 1,000, and they went down to 130. But all the estates had workers, white and black, slaves. They had mules, they had cattle, and they had cooperage. Cooperage. You know what cooperage is? I bet you don't know. The lady who was typing for me said, what is cooperage? She called it something else. And I said, you see the barrels that they store rum in? You know, have you been to Appleton Estate? You haven't been to Appleton. Appleton has the largest collection of barrels that they store rum in. And those barrels are made by Coopers, Coopers, Coopers. And I come from a part of Jamaica called Sturgetown. And that's the second free village in Jamaica. And I had living not too far from me a gentleman who was a cooper. He made tubs, he made these drums, he made all kinds to store water, and also made some of the things that they store the rum in down at Landovery. So, 1699 was the last record that they kept. By 1768, exports went to 46,000 tons, long tons of sugar. How many pounds in a long ton? Well, somebody knows. How many pounds are in a long ton? No, you really serious? No, a short ton. 2240. 2,240. 2,240 in long ton. And short ton is 2,000 pounds. I'll charge for that information a little later on, huh? Good. So they used to have it in long tons. The whole 2,000 pound ton came much later. Long ton was what they measured the sugar in for a very long time. In 1768, they exported 46,000 long tons, 1,551 puncheon now, of rum, about 1,710,000 gallons of rum, and 202,000 gallons of molasses. In those days, the sugar industry had a large number of plantation and works, including distilleries. So they used to call where they have the sugar plantation the works. That's where everything took place. You make sugar, you make rum, you make molasses, and there was bagasse. There were 769 such units, works, in 1791. And a few years later, there was a total of 1,000 works. Each was self-contained with European local staff. As I told you a while ago, I was giving you a little lesson in the cooperage. Export of sugar reached 12,000 tons in 1805, a record not exceeded for 133 years. During the Napoleonic Wars, the price of sugar supplied to Britain made the region prosperous for sugar and rum producers of the country. At that time, they said that you were a really rich person if you had investment in Jamaica and parts of the Caribbean, but Jamaica in particular. You had to be a rich man to own a property that produces rum, sugar, molasses in the Caribbean. This was followed by a fall in quantities and prices to the market. But every now and again, you have a little up and down in the production. The industry, sugar industry, became dependent on export. It didn't have much local production, much consumption. It was dependent on export. So the international market was up and down. And because of that, the prices were up and down until they start making modern factories in 1910. In 1920, we had 52 factories, produced 40,855 tons of sugar. 1922, we had 46 factories, 55,185 tons. 1927, 38 factories, we produced 63,525 tons. 1932, we seem to have 34 factories, yes, and produce 59,442. 1937, the year I was born, so don't calculate my age yet. 108,308 tons. 1942, 26 factories, 157,746. 47, we produced 173,253. 1952, 21 factories, 270,125. 1957, we produced 364,812. And 1962, 17 factories. I have a little problem with some of these figures because my record elsewhere tells me that the top production in Jamaica was 1965, when we produced 530,000 tons of sugar. One of the largest production. That's the largest production ever done. Now, the number of factories that I collected, and Doctor spent a long time on the one in Mona at the university. But there's only one factory they had in St. Andrew, only one. In St. Thomas, they had 6. In Trelawney, they had 26 factories. In St. James, they had 18, and in Hanover, they had 13. Westmoreland had 21 factories, St. Elizabeth, 4, Clarendon, 12, St. Catherine, 8, a total of 112 factories. And this is from the Handbook of Jamaica, the All Island Jamaica Cane Farmers Association, and the report out of SIA on an annual basis. So at one stage, we had 112 factories. Production has kept reducing, as was also said, until 2024, when, that is last year, this year. You know how much sugar they produce this year? 34,600 tons. 34,600. And that was done at 2 factories. Anybody knows the 2 factories that are in operation? Eh? Worthy Park and? No, man, no. From. The Chinese own Frome And the Clarks and the McConnells own Worthy Park. And they have owned that factory for over 100 years. All right? Now, I worked with Mr. Robert Clark, who was manager for the factory part of Worthy Park for years. He's the only manager who ever called me at 2 o'clock in the morning. Mr. James, they have a problem at Old Shurias where there is a breakdown in the shipping program. And if I don't get a truck out by 7 o'clock tomorrow, I have to close. And they always threaten me now, you know. Since my responsibility is to move the sugar, they threaten me that if I don't move it, they're going to charge my company $1,000, $1 million a day. So I had to get on the phone, find people who would make sure they get out the line and give Mr. Clark truck to go in, so at least one truck comes out and he can get sugar getting back into the production. The actual production of sugar from cane should be well known by every Jamaican, since it's an annual exercise in most parts of Jamaica. I said that, but I know it's not true. I went to the University of the West Indies one year to give a lecture in international marketing, which really concentrated on sugar, since we were one of the bigger sugar distributors, and was amazed at the little information that the university students had on sugar. I was amazed. They never knew a lot of things that I took for granted that they should have known. The sugar cane is burnt. When it gets to 9 to 12 months, they burn it. Then they cut it with machetes. Or in some cases, they use what they call mechanical harvesters. I'll tell you, the Right Honorable Alexander Bustamante was Prime Minister of Jamaica, and the guys wanted him. He had representation in Clarendon. The guys in Clarendon wanted him to give permission for them to reap the cane by mechanical harvesters. He says not over his dead body, because we are going to displace the workers who cut the cane and make their livelihood from cane. So it took a long time after Buster died before you saw them reaping cane with mechanical harvesters. And they really have not done a very good job with it. Not even the Chinese who are here right now. I'll get to that part. So they reap it, they take it to the factory, and they wash. Then they crush the cane in these big mills and separate the bagasse, thrash, you call it cane thrash, from the liquid. The liquid goes into a vat that is heated by the cane thrash. Boil it until it gets to a thick syrup, and they put it through a centrifuge where they separate the grain from the molasses. But they also separate out with that process what they call the filter mud. The filter mud goes back into the field to fertilize the cane. So at the end of a day, they have brought in cane, they have crushed cane, they have produced molasses and produced sugar, and they have produced filter mud. And everybody has their place to go. In Brazil, all the big sugar factories are all self-sufficient in energy. They don't buy any energy from JPSCO. The sugar cane that they crush, that bagasse then goes into a dry storage that they use to fuel the vats to boil down the cane. So Worthy Park today remains the lowest cost producer in Jamaica. Well, it's the only one really producing. And they use their bagasse as their energy. They start the crop by using bamboo. But once they start delivering cane, they have enough bagasse from the cane to really boil and produce. So the average production at Worthy Park is about 26,000 tons of sugar. When I joined sugar industry in 1986, Frome had produced 70,000 tons of sugar. This year, Frome produced 12,900 tons of sugar. So you know that at that stage, there's no way you can make money. But the Chinese don't have to make money. They don't have to make money. They have enough money, and so they just put it in there and keep the factory going. The sugar produced at Worthy Park is the best quality for years. Before that, they were superseded by Appleton Estate. One of the worst quality sugar produced is Frome, right? And then they had one, and I won't tell you the name they call it, used to be produced at Hamden. Hamden was one of the smallest factory, produced 12,000 tons of sugar per year before they closed it. But any area in Jamaica that there's a sugar factory, there's a lot of activity taking place where people earn a lot of money in that period. The crop starts in November, finishes at Worthy Park very often in July, but all of them in between. So they stop from about April, May, June, July, stop production, and then they get ready to start the next crop. In 1960, when all sugar factories were privately owned, production reached as I told you earlier on, 523,000 tons from 18 factories which operated that year. Export sugar amounted to 424,000 tons in 1965, with 241,000 tons going to UK, 103,000 tons to Canada, and 79,000 tons going to the United States. We had a reasonable size quota to the US soon after Castro took over Cuba. And what we have now is a residue of what is still left after Castro. There were always a fear that when America and Castro come to an agreement Jamaica will lose its quota. Because that we are supplying was from sugar that Cuba used to supply all of the requirements to the United States. Plus, U.S. also produce beet sugar, but cane sugar is produced in the tropics. Tate and Lyle came into the sugar industry in Jamaica in 1936. They got together, Tate and Lyle, two business people in UK, and they went to the bank. Now they are able to go to the bank. So they go to the bank. At that time, the name of the bank was Barclays Bank, Dominion, Colonial, and Overseas. So you used to see Barclays Bank, DCO, that's what it meant. And they borrowed money from Barclays to buy land and to establish factories in Jamaica. So they owned from Monimos, Bernard Lodge, the three largest factories. And they produced the biggest part of the production. And of course, most of their export went to Tate and Lyle in UK. That's where they have the sugar refinery. And I'm going to just point out to you that Tate and Lyle was doing some refinery at Monimos. Monimos was the second largest factory. However, the quality of sugar that was produced, refined sugar now, at Monimos was not all that great. Most of it was used in the production of condensed milk. Condensed milk don't have to be white. What color is condensed milk? Huh? Yellow, cream, right? So they use it. They also use it in the beverages, the aerated waters that produce at D&G and all the other people, except for cream soda. They can't use it in cream soda. For cream soda, it's a clear drink. But they supplied that. When I came to sugar, I decided I was going to try and produce some refined sugar. Well, see, I'm at the chemist, you know. The guys who are the chemists are in the factory. And somehow or the other, they never got it right. And so we decided to close the refinery, refurbish it, and then start producing refined sugar for Jamaica, because at that time, Jamaica was consuming 60,000 tons of brown sugar, but using 80,000 tons of refined sugar in all the manufacturing exercises that we were doing, including condensed milk and the soft drinks. However, that pull-down factory, ready to be replaced, has never been replaced. We never produce a ton of refined sugar anymore at Monimos. Why? Because you get all the refined sugar from overseas. That has been part of my challenge with the sugar industry. I must tell you that. As somebody who believes you must make stuff in Jamaica where you can make it, I did not support the fact. Now, the Chinese were supposed to build a factory here by 2016. They have not built one brick yet of a factory to do refined sugar in Jamaica. Not. But let me share with you. before I went to sugar, I worked with Me Johnson. And some of you ladies use Chlorodo bleach every week. I developed Chlorodo bleach. The first factory doing some of it was on Barbican Road, just as you start coming down to Shields and Shields. Then it was transferred to Malines Road. And I got permission, and it's a little digression, I'm not giving you no special lesson in this one. I got permission to build a new one on Spanish Town Road, because they say it was better to have that kind of space. And they said to me, Mr. James, you have to pay back for that factory in 5 years. I built it, and we paid back for it in 3 years. Well, today, Chlorodo is the largest sugar bleach manufacturer in Jamaica. I also tried to manufacture Nutriment. Anybody remember Nutriment? Thanks. Right. No, sorry. Yes. Nutriment was one of the biggest products in Jamaica. Imported, Mr. Manley said it's too expensive, you can't import it, so they tell me that I have to find a way to produce it locally. So I was trying to produce it locally. And I went to a factory in Linstead, tried to negotiate the production of Nutriment there. And eventually, when I told the gentleman the quantity I wanted, I saw his eyes pop. Anyway, he told me that they can't do it because they're going to use the line. And they assigned their chemist, who I know very well, 2 years to come up with a replacement for Nutriment. What product is that? Suppligent. I'm just telling you that I take credit for them being on the market because I believe you must produce it in Jamaica. Right? So let me move on quickly. In 1962, Jamaica exports of sugar, rum, and molasses amounted to 16 million pounds. And in 5 years, it went to 16,687,000 pounds. We exported 221,000 tons of sugar under the quota to Europe. And under the free quota you sell anywhere in the world, we exported 86,000. The US quota was 63,000. And local consumption, that's 1962, was 64,000. Between 1972 and 1976, sugar produced 1,800 tons. In 1974, sugar shipped 50,000 tons of sugar per year for 7 years to Iran. You remember the Iran sugar deal? I'm not going there. 1975, the EU allocated to Jamaica 126,000 tons of sugar annually at an annually negotiated fixed price that you could go to the bank. And let me just quickly tell you, when we need to borrow money from sugar exports, you go to the bank, you explain to the bank, we have a quota of 126,000 tons each year. 2, we have a fixed price, don't vary for the year, for the sugar. 3, we are going to ship it to one of the most reputable entity in Europe called Tate and Lyle. Therefore, you can't lose. So any bank would lend us money, whether it is BNS, whether it is Barclays, whether it's a consortium in it, they lend us money and pay back for it. So the last one that I dealt with was what is now residue of Development Bank of Jamaica. They were not Development Bank, they were Agricultural Credit Bank. We borrowed $100 million, paid back in 5 years, and the residue from all that transaction started Development Bank of Jamaica. Final. The Chinese bought the last 2 factories, 3 factories. They paid $10 million for the 3 factories. I think they made back their money by scrapping Bernard Lodge. They made back all their money from scrapping Bernard Lodge. And from Anonymous, they spent over $200 million to refurbish those factories. But only Frome remains in production. Bernard Lodge is not producing anything. However, they are taking Bernard Lodge to the stage where Monimus, where Monimus was self-sufficient in energy. So much so that after they had done that and provided all the energy, JPSCO descended upon them one morning saying that they were bypassing the grid. The guy said, no, we have invested money, we have brought the thing up to scratch, and we are self-sufficient. The problem was that JPSCO was not collecting $18 million a week from the factory because they were now producing their own. That's the kind of money you have in sugar if you can do what you're supposed to do. But I will say this, that Jamaica has not given up totally on sugar. And if you go into the supermarkets like I did Friday, you will notice a good list of brands, because I introduced that to Jamaica. And so my brand was Jamaica Gold. By the time I registered Jamaica Gold in the UK with the lawyers, somebody had already registered Jamaica Gold, and they don't produce the Jamaica Gold. But the lawyer said to me, he said, James, don't worry, I'm going ahead with it, and nobody has ever challenged us. So we have brands now, and we don't do much selling because Mr. Samuda declared the Jamaican people must eat sugar properly produced, must be properly packaged, it must be branded, in other words, you know which one, New Pack, Tropicana, Worthy Park, or Golden Crystal, Jamaica Gold. And that is where you know what you get. I'm hoping before I shut my eyes that the Chinese and Worthy Park will get back the production up to where we can say we are self-sufficient. We are not self-sufficient. They tell me that we are self-sufficient. No, with 36,000? No. I know what is happening, but I won't tell you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you so much again, Mr. Karl James, for that presentation. Now we would like to welcome our last presenter on the program, Mr. Adaine Campbell, Quality Assurance Manager at Epic Technologies. Please, everyone, welcome Mr. Campbell.
Yeah. But you know, when you go over, you know, put it in the big tab and you go over. Like, you know, expand the screen. It's okay, I'll just, that's working. Good morning, everyone. So the speakers before me spoke about the history of sugar, you know, very detailed and informative. But what I'll be speaking on is reimagining how we experience history. What I'll be speaking on today is immersive user experience. So at the end of this presentation, you know, you'll have an idea of what is user experience, why user experience is important in the virtual space, and how you can get started in user experience if that's something you're interested in. So about me, just a bit about myself. I'm Adaine Campbell and I do user experience. From a child, I had a passion for art, and in high school, I fell in love with IT. User experience offers me the opportunity to be doing both my passion and my love. How did I get started in user experience? Well, I was first introduced to user experience in university, where I did the course Human-Computer Interactions, and later went on to do projects at Epic Technology, which would be my current place of employment. So for user experience, some projects that I've worked on Epic HR Cloud, which is a cloud-based HR application designed with the user or HR user at its core. I also worked on Epic Finance, which is a premium financing application for premium financial companies, and many other projects that has helped me to refine my skills as a user experience designer. Now getting into it, have you ever wondered why the rubber was added to the handle of the pen, or why all our favorite apps have a search option, or even why we now have contactless water faucets? You know, yes, having the rubber on the pen does make holding the pen a whole lot easier. Having the water faucets that are automatic does help you to not reintroduce germs to your hands after washing. And having the search option on your favorite apps surely does help you to find things faster. But let's dig a bit further. Why were these things introduced? And it all comes down to the user experience. So the user experience is basically the holistic journey traversed by a user while using a product or service. So two words that stand out would be journey, traverse. So user experience is taking the user from picking up your product to actually using your product. So you have to take that whole process into consideration when designing for user experience. And this would be the same for the virtual user experience as well. What is the virtual user experience? Well, this refers to the process of designing interfaces and experience for virtual users. So let's go into, let's experience VR. Imagine putting on your VR goggles and looking into the distance, seeing a satellite as we're seeing here, and looking beyond the satellite, you're seeing the oval we call Earth. You look to your left, you see the endless void of space. You look to the right, you see other planetary bodies. So while having your VR goggles on, you hear this sound. Now, reimagine the same experience, having your goggles on, seeing the satellite, the oval we call Earth, and instead of hearing that, you hear this sound. Oh, I'm hoping you heard the sounds correctly. But I'm sure you'd say that what offered the most or the better user experience would have been the second option, as auditorily, it was like you were actually in space. As in space, you wouldn't be expecting to hear, traffic, the sound of siren or buzzing of horns. So basically, that would be the user experience. So things to consider when doing your user experience are the principles of user experience for the virtual space. You have to consider the comfort and ergonomics, intuitive navigation, interactive design, and visual and auditory feedback. As it regards to comfort, comfort is paramount when designing for VR. Steps must be taken to help minimize motion sickness and visual comfort by adding appropriate movement speed and smooth navigation, thus reducing unnecessary motion. Ergonomics, have to consider all body types and ensure that there's no unnecessary strains. Intuitive navigation, users should be able to navigate the virtual environment naturally. This can involve using hand controls, voice commands, or even gaze direction. The goal is to create a navigation system that feels second nature, which should help to reduce the learning curve for users. Going into interactive design, VR interactions must be designed to mimic real-world actions. This includes pressing buttons, picking up objects, and manipulating virtual tools. Visual and auditory feedback. Clear visual cues and auditory feedbacks are crucial for guiding users on conforming actions. For instance, highlighting interactive objects when the user looks at them, and providing sound effects when an action is completed. So let's go into immersion. Let's look at immersion. To ensure users are immersed, designers must consider the following. Environmental realism. So creating realistic and detailed environment is essential for immersion. High quality graphics, like textures and appropriate lighting, all contributes to making the virtual world believable. And with that being said, what the Jamaica Institute is doing or will be unveiling stands up to this test. So it's a great way for us to reimagine how history is being done. So instead of having to actually go through paper to experience history, you can experience history from a perspective of actually being there, seeing the visual elements, and hearing the actual sounds of the events taking place. One other thing that you have to consider is the consistency of this design. Consistent element in the design, such as colors, fonts, and iconography, helps users build a mental model for virtual environment. Consistent design reduces cognitive load and makes interaction more predictable. They also have to look at user-centered design. So understanding the target audience and their needs is crucial when designing for the virtual user space. Conducting user research and usability testing ensure that VR experience aligns with user expectations and preferences. How to get started as a UX designer? Well, We can all start with YouTube. You have a lot of content on YouTube. It's like an online university. You can also do courses on Udemy, which provides a lot of information on, user experience. And you also have a Google certification that you can do in user experience. So, concluding, I know it was short, but hopefully it's informative. I'll be ending with a quote from Frank Simero. He said that people ignore designs that ignores people. So when designing for users, ensure that you consider the user. Thank you.
All right, everyone. So thank you again, Mr. Campbell, for that really short but to the point presentation about user experience. And I know everybody may be now wondering, I hope you realize that, like everybody was talking about sugar, 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 history of sugar, Jamaica's thing with sugar. Why Mr. Campbell came on last is that now we're going to launch officially the virtual museum. And thank you for your endorsement, sir, that we checked off all of the, we hope all of the boxes. So hopefully you all agree, based on what Mr. Campbell said, that we've checked off all of these things to make this experience as immersive as possible. And I'd like to now welcome Ms. Zoe O'Sullivan, our curatorial assistant and the curator of this virtual museum, to the stage. And her assistant, Mr. Ruel Cook, who is the creator of it, who will be sitting down, pushing the buttons. So, Mr. Cook and Zoe, please come on stage. Please welcome them.
Welcome, everybody. I am Zoe O'Sullivan, and I'd like to apologize for how nasal I sound. I'm fighting a sinus infection currently. Now, I curated this virtual exhibit along with Ruel Cook. But before we begin, I must acknowledge Ms. Shanika Mullins, who really gave us the idea for this exhibit to bring it to fruition. So today we are gathered here to navigate the space together, and I'm going to explain to you my thought processes and intentions about designing the space the way it is, and then afterwards you can go on our website and navigate the exhibit for yourself. Of the exhibit, and we designed the exhibit in the form of a museum. This is the outside of the space, and the lighting in this area acts as foreshadowing, just like the instrumental in the trailer. I didn't want the lighting in this area to be bright and sunny because the topic of this particular exhibit, it's not bright and sunny, so I made it a duskish feel, because at dusk it's a period of reflection, and that's you get to think and how your day went, And that's the feel I wanted to bring to this exhibit. Now, in this space, we are also introduced to Amali and Akena, who are our narrators.
Hello, my name is Akena. Thank you for visiting our exhibition titled Sugar, the Bittersweet Taste of Past and Present. Your journey through the spaces today will explore a range of topics surrounding the sugarcane plant and how it helped to build the island that we now know as home, Jamaica land we love.
Hello, my name is Emily. Thank you for visiting our exhibition titled Sugar, the Bittersweet Taste of Past and Present. Your journey through the spaces today will explore a range of topics surrounding the sugarcane plant and how it helped to build the island that we now know as home, Jamaica land we love.
All right, so the narrators were created because the storyboards in the spaces are very long, and I know that sometimes people don't like reading very long things, so they were created to act as something that you could listen to while you navigate the space. Now, in this area, you will also see at the bottom of the screen there's a tutorial that will help you to navigate the spaces. So it will just tell you about how you can move through the spaces. There's also a map on the side, the lower left-hand corner of the exhibit, and it tells you your progress as you navigate the space. And if you don't want to jump from sequentially, you can just go to one of the highlighted circles within the map and it will take you directly to that section. Now, this is our introductory section of the space, and you'll notice there's a kiosk at the front. That kiosk holds a storyboard, so you can just click on it and the storyboard pops up.
The bittersweet history. Saccharum officinarum, better known as sugarcane, is a crop that was instrumental in shaping the foundation of many countries. Sugar, the bittersweet taste of past and present, is an exhibition that explores the depths of the sugar cane industry in Jamaica. It is a journey.
Now, please note that you can mute the audio of the exhibit at any time. And you can also, there's also an about section which will tell you all about the exhibit. There's also a photo album that gives you all the pictures that is in the exhibit itself. And we also have a 360 view of the entire exhibit, which are all the spaces that is in the exhibit. And you can just click on any one that you want and it will take you directly to that particular space. Now, this section is our passage to the island space. We have 8 spaces in total in the entire exhibit. How you will know when you finish a topic and are beginning a different topic is when you move from space to space and you realize that the space is different. So this space is our passage to the island exhibit, and it has to do with how sugarcane originated in the island of Jamaica. And I had the idea to do this space in the form of a ship representing how the sugarcane crop was transported to the island and also the enslaved peoples. Now, this space, the lighting in this section is a little darker than the previous section, so it's alluding to a more melancholic topic of focus within this space. Now this section is our anatomy of sugarcane section. And in this section, we look at the main parts of the sugarcane and their functions. Now you will see corresponding images on the wall that is blinking with an eye that you can click on, and it will tell you more about the image that you are seeing. You'll notice that we have a light drizzle in this space. That was actually Roel's idea. When we actually went to Appleton Estate during our field research stage of this project, we were informed that we were supposed to come before the afternoon because every day it rains in the afternoon there. And we were skeptical. However, when we went there, the rain actually did fall in the afternoon. So they experience rain there quite often in the afternoons. So this is just a nod to that little fact. Now this section is our great house section, which is known as plantations then and now. This has to do with the different estates that were on the island, with most of them being closed presently, and Appleton being the only one that is currently in operation as one of the longest continuous running sugar estates on the island. Each section of the house has different rooms with pictures of old sugar estates appearing on the walls of the great house, which are clickable. So that was actually just a small part of the Appleton estate that was drone image from their property. Now this is in the form of a hut for the enslaved worker. This section is called our life of the enslaved workers. And in this section, we feature the implements which were used to punish enslaved workers. The rain and darker lighting add to the despondent feel of the space and the topic being discussed. And if you click on the vitrines, which are the glass cases, you can see the different implements that were used to punish the enslaved workers with captions going along with the images. The boiling house was a fundamental part of the sugar making process, and I had to make that in the tour. I had to find a way to put it into the tour, so I made it the tools used in the sugar making process segment of the tour. So in this section we have artifacts which are found in the National Collection along with artifacts from the Appleton Estate. And this section is our byproducts of sugar section. This section also features artifacts from the National Collection, which some are on display currently outside of the lecture hall. And also Appleton Estate artifacts are in this section as well. This section is also much brighter because the topic being discussed is a lot lighter than previous sections. And finally, this is our last space, which is in the form of a theater. This features former national athlete Danielle Dowie, who is also a nutritionist, who speak with us about the nutritional aspects of sugar.
My name is Danielle Dowie, and I am a nutritionist, educator, and author. Bachelor's in Nutritional Sciences from the University of Texas. As a nutritionist, I think for the average person, when you hear the word sugar,
now you can watch the full video on the National Museum Jamaica's YouTube page. So thank you everybody for coming to our launch today. And I would like to take the time out to thank a few persons. Now, firstly, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to Samara South, who acted as liaison between National Museum Jamaica and Appleton Estate. Her tireless efforts and seamless coordination were pivotal in bringing together all elements needed to make this project a reality. To Danielle Dowie for not saying no when two random strangers, myself and Alexis McDavid, came up and enlisted her help to provide expert advice on the nutritional aspects of the exhibit. I also would like to acknowledge the hard work of the editors Sharifa Balfour, Kerry-Ann Watson, Romaine Thomas, and Alexis McDavid. Your meticulous attention to detail and your ability to refine and perfect the content of the spaces were of a high quality, and I know that when I came up to your desk or sent an email with 3-page edits or 30-minute video edits, you all soldiered on and assisted, and I would like to personally thank you for your exceptional work. A special thank you goes out to the most instrumental part of this project, Roel Cook, graphic designer, who brought my creative ideas and vision to life. His incredible talent and dedication and countless hours have resulted in an exhibit that is visually captivating. Your skills have made the exhibit what it is, and we here at the National Museum Jamaica are very fortunate to have you. Thank you to the presenters for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and give us expert advice on the topics of the exhibit today. And last but not least, I want to express my sincere gratitude to our director, Jonathan Greenan, Dr. Jonathan Greenland, I am sorry, for providing approval and support for the exhibit. Your leadership and trust in our team have been instrumental in bringing this project to fruition. To everyone who has contributed to the success of the virtual exhibit, thank you. I am overjoyed to have worked with all of you. Our collaboration has made this an outstanding project, and I look forward to future projects together. Thank you. And the exhibit is now live, so you may view it at your leisure.
So everybody, this is one of the very few times ever, maybe in a public presentation, we now tell you to take out your phone so that you can scan the QR code to see the exhibition right now live. And for everyone online, as Zoe said, it's on our website. Your phone? Where? Where is your remote? Where is it? Guys, when you finish with the code, pass it around, please. For me? All right, students, have you all scanned the QR code? All right, fantastic. Now, just to wrap up, we're asking, does anybody have any questions for the presenters here or online? Can you please, online YouTubers? There's questions for students? All right, my lovely St. Hilda's lady, can you just go to one of the microphones and acknowledge, is it a particular speaker? Which speaker? Huh? Oh, Dr. Francis Brown? And who? And me? You want me? What am I gonna know? Okay, all right. Dr. Francis Brown? Students need you. Questions? I know. Right up here, please.
Hi.
All right, everyone, if you can just settle down a little bit so that we can give the students now an opportunity to be heard and for Dr. Francis Brown to answer. All right, my love, please go ahead with your question.
Check. Oh, perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tashira Thompson. I'm a student from the St. Hilda's Diocesan High School. So Dr. Francis Brown, I'm very appreciative that you shift the focus from just simply sugar, but you allowed us to see or look into those who were before us who sacrificed for us, and we have names to link to these people we usually classify them as. I want to know, have you ever been able to use a 21st century family or person to trace back to the enslaved, like any continuous lineage?
Okay, so not in terms of Papine yet, and part of that is because it's, in a way, what I'm trying to do is almost proof of concept. People now is their history. They make the choices as to whether they want to make this journey. So what I'm trying to do is trace from the period of slavery coming down. And in terms of the family tree that I showed you, it goes into the 1860s, 1870s. So there's a good chance that it's possible to actually come to the present day. But other people certainly have done that. I've been involved in programs where people have come, in many cases, from the UK or from other places looking for their history and have been able to find their way back into the period of slavery, yes.
Okay,
so it is possible.
Perfect, thank you for that. And I have one more question.
Sure.
Have we as Creole people preserved too many cultural elements of our white oppressors, potentially overshadowing and undervaluing our rich African culture? And that question came to me from when it was mentioned earlier that we still find it hard to accept patois. We still find it as being of a lower class. If you're in a setting like this, I'm gonna say, Wagwan, you're good?
Personally, I think that if you have a language, the language has value, the language has culture, and there is absolutely no reason not to recognize it. At the same time, we also want to make sure that we can operate in an international world, and I don't see any reason why it has to be one or the other. It can be both. There are difficulties along the way, but you know, there is no doubt that in a situation of colonialism, the colonizers' culture, etc., is going to become the primary thing to which many people aspire. I think that there have been many people along the way who have argued for recognition of African cultural values, etc. I think we are a Creole people. That's the first point that you made. And hence we have to draw on all the potentialities that we have, all the histories that we have, all the things that are out there for us, and make what works for us here. So I am a Creole person. I come from here. I don't come from Europe. I don't come from Africa. But the truth of the matter is that my DNA speaks to both.
Definitely.
Right? Even brown in skin, there's still both. But this is where I come from. This is where I want to build. This is where I want to live. And I want to make aspects of culture that draw on all of the things that feed us, but express who we are in our setting here. So
And
that's my perspective.
Thank you for that answer, and I definitely agree. I believe communication is a big part of who we are, and patois isn't the only way. We're going to be speaking to persons from so many different backgrounds, and it's important we know how to communicate properly with them. But I want to still further delve into other aspects of our culture, not just patois, but just the mere fact that there's a lot of us that we use and it's not from our African lineage or Creole ancestors, but from the English. So even the clothes we wear, even the way we view things, it's as if our lens have been blocked or covered by just the English. So what other aspects of our culture do you think is really influenced by this?
I mean, I think that there's an extent to which international cultures to which we ascribe are influenced by Europe. They're influenced by many places of that sort. But I do think that we have options. I think that we have exposure to all the different areas, and it's really for us to draw. I don't think any of us is locked off. Yes, that might have been the case in the past, but I think even though the norms are more European in terms of, you know, the English language or some of the music, there's a lot that's out there, and it's up to us to decide what fits for us and what we accept and what we want to do, recognizing always that we are in a society, and so there's always a negotiation in terms of you and the person next door to you and the person on the other side. Yeah.
Thank you. That's all for you for today.
Okay.
I have a question from Ms. McDavid, as I mentioned earlier. It's just a simple question, nothing to be frightened of.
Because I was like, be gentle, guys. Okay, go on through.
All right, so having mentioned earlier that you recently found out you are a descendant of a slave owner who had 37 black slaves.
13.
13, sorry. 13 black slaves. It has brought me to realize or remember the disgusting reality of colorism within our society and how it can cause separation. But personally, has this information changed your perspective in any way? Has it compelled you to delve more into your history?
Well, the thing is, the will that my cousin sent was very comprehensive. It mentioned, you know, my ancestors who were colored, and even in connection to Dr. Francis Brown's presentation, a lot of it mentions them being baptized as well. So it was pretty, you know, that's a comprehensive. The thing is, my family, again, why I was able to get this document is we've always been interested in our genealogy, the European side and the African side. Unfortunately, you know, unless, you know, I guess we pay a genealogist, we would love to delve more into the African side. Like, could we trace the names that were on the document to a country, a tribe, something? But unfortunately, my family don't have that kind of money right now, so we get joke. But it would be nice if we could, because it's easier, and Dr. Francis Brown can tell me if I'm wrong, all right, to find the European, like ancestors. Like, you know, to Google the enslaver. But, you know, everybody else was, you know, it's harder. But one of the things the document did kind of enlighten my family is that people, I think, tend to romanticize who they are. So, you know, I remember talking to my mom, my dearly departed mother, who, you know, I remember one time saying to her, and again, this is before the document, that because we've always known in the family, this is where we come from, but we didn't have names and like specific areas and regions of Jamaica and numbers, now that we know it's 13 slaves and all of that. And, I used to say, based on the family stories, that, oh, he must have loved the lady to have so many children with her and to free them, to give them property after he died in the will. And then my mother was like, no. Don't try romanticize nothing. How could you love basically an enslaver and a slave? The man raped her.
Right.
Have the picnic them with her.
Absolutely.
They survived. And when you read the will too, it looks like some of them he did not free. So again, why did he free some and not all? Or he freed the children but not their mother? Maybe because he didn't want to continue with things with the lady.
Right.
So he have to keep her close, right?
But does it mean that you sometimes or somehow feel a little more connected to that side of family since that you have more information?
Yeah,
on
we do
them?
feel more connected.
To the,
and we still actually live on the land that was given to us by in the will. We still live on the land. And the grave of him and the lady is actually on the property.
Do you have any immediate families that are of darker skin tone?
Oh yeah, much
they
darker.
They live on that land
much
as well?
Darker.
How do they live on that land as well? And
Yeah,
know the
man.
history?
Everybody, people my color, lighter than me.
No, darker
and darker. Yeah, man. They all live there.
Have they ever expressed how they feel to stand out that land? Like,
well,
hey,
not to me.
My grandmother did get raped by this man, right? So and I'm on this land now, standing.
Well, as I said, not to me.
Oh.
Maybe they would have done to my mother because it's my maternal side.
Okay.
But for example, one of my family, and this is not an endorsement, and we're kind of always hesitant to say it.
Yeah.
The last name of my family is Warmington. Who in politics is Warmington? Exactly. You see how dark him is?
Right.
And look how light I am.
Right. Perfect. Thank you for that answer. Thank you. That's it.
Oh, yes, ma'am. For me too again? Oh, praise Jesus. All right, come back.
These questions are mild considered in comparison to. All right, so Dr. Brown, you said that you were retracing the identities with names, of course, but have you ever, we know that slaves were separated, the tribes were separated in order for them not to revolt. Were you ever able to trace back some of those tribes?
I think one of the things to remember is that there's a lot that we don't know, right? So we know that there were persons who tried to make sure that there weren't large conglomerations of people who could speak to each other, etc., in the same language. But we really have very few details that we can actually call upon to say this percentage in this particular place. So in a sense, the answer is no, but at the same time, one of the things that you find in looking at some of the records that I mentioned is that there will be what we call ethnic identifiers. So, for instance, let us say that there were 3 people on an estate named Mary. And they want to make a distinction between the 3 Marys.
Yes.
You might have Igbo Mary, right? You might have Chamba Mary, and you might have Big Mary, right? They will make those distinctions on the record. Now, it's not an absolute. Sometimes it's how they understand it. But sometimes, like when they use Igbo or Chamba or Mandingo or, what, Karamanti or whatever of them, those are identifiers with a location that relates back to particular parts of Africa. So sometimes there is information which maybe can be used, but it doesn't apply to everybody.
All right, 2 more. Can you discuss the challenges you face in accurately reconstructing the identities of enslaved people?
Well, like I said to you, part of it, right? The good thing is that at a certain point, and that point is usually for most people in the 1817 kind of region, there is some record of everybody. All right, that's a good thing. The bad thing is, in order to use that information, we have to be able to connect it to who those people are now. So we have to have records that say Chamba Mary was baptized and her name is now Charlotte Smith. Okay? If we don't have that record, then we have a gap and we can't pass it.
All right.
Right? So those are some of the challenges.
Okay, last one. Can you share any specific case or example where tracing a slave's name led to a significant insight?
Like what? I mean,
like
think what's in your head.
it's connected to another major person or this big discovery.
I mean, I've been involved in programs where well-known people were able to find ancestors who had been enslaved. There was one particular case where she was able to get right back to a great, I think it was 5 or 6 times great-grandmother who had been born in Africa, right? So that was very impactful for her because that would have been, on one line of her family, the person who came across the Middle Passage, right? And he can't get past there because most people who landed in Jamaica were renamed, all right? So the name they left Africa with and the name they start in Jamaica with are very, very rarely, if ever, the same. So that's a big challenge, all right? But there have been people who have found ancestors who go right back to the edge of that. And then nowadays, because of DNA, it's possible that even though you can't find who that specific ancestor was, you might be able to find which area people came from, you know, whether they came from the coast, whether they had been enslaved inland and brought to the coast. So there are various ways of getting information.
All right.
Like I said, it's not a magic bullet, but it is possible.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Dr.
You're very welcome. That's it.
I don't know. Any other questions? No questions from the gentleman of St. George's College, or as my brother who went says, George's. And I know every time I say that, uno cringe, but guess what? I know me say it, it's one of uno say it, so. No questions from the gentleman of St. George's College? STGC, good and true, we are the boys in the white and blue, nothing? No, just flops up, all right, fine. Any questions from the teachers? Where teacher them gone? Hello, Coco? Any teachers? No teachers? Okay. Any questions for the curators, the graphic designers, anything? Anybody online? Hello? Anybody? Not you, I'm saying hello to the people online. Anybody? No? Nothing? Okay. All right, guys. Well, if there's no questions from anybody online or from, okay, thus endeth the event. Who has a question? Alric? You're not a student. Background, that's for you.
Where you can get the physical documents
to trace
in terms of tracing specific people. It really depends on how far back you can go in terms of where people were. Mm-hmm. Is a big problem. There are a lot of challenges, right? There are a lot of challenges. The records that I'm talking about in terms of the slave returns, they operate between 1817 and 1832. 1833 is the Abolition Act, 1834 is abolition, 1838 is emancipation. Indentureship comes into play between the 1840s and the 1920s. A lot of people changed their names, right? A lot of the indentured Indians who came here right now I'm looking for somebody, and the person is named as one thing in a record in 1920, and then he dies as somebody else. If you don't know those two facts, you cannot bridge that gap, right? So there are huge challenges. The other thing is that in the 1840s, there was legislation to try and put in place regulations relating to baptisms, marriages, etc. They were pretty much ignored for a lot of the time up to 1880, when the current civil registration that we are familiar with came into play. So that period between the end of slavery, when at least there were these slave return documents between 1817 and 1832, and between the 1830s and 1880s, that's one of the reasons I was saying that the problem is more so for people who are not engaged with religious organizations. If you did not baptize your child, if you did not marry your wife, if you did not get buried in the church, there's a very, very good chance there is no record of your life histories, your life milestones. So you really have to put a lot of things on top of each other. You have to look in a lot of places, right? The newspaper, look in the newspapers as well. The Gleaner Online Archive is one of them. The reason, if people had a little piece of land in the late 1800s, they were registering titles. Sometimes you'll find some little reference to somebody in the advertisements registering titles. You look to see if you can find the records of registration of birth. One of the challenges with registration of birth, sometimes we register children without a name, right? So at that point, who are you looking for? Do you know the name of the lady whose child it is? If you don't know her name and you don't know the child's name, the child has no name, you cannot find them, all right? So you're looking for that. A lot of Jamaican children are registered under their mother's name, and when they come to be married, they give their father's name if they know who their father is, right? If you don't know that this person is the child of this lady and this man, you have a humongous gap. So you also need to be talking to your relatives. Get all the family stories, right? Find out from your grandmother, find out from your auntie, find out from your uncle. What are the stories that are out there? Where did you come from? Are there any photographs, right? What did people do? Write it all down. All of it becomes grist for the mill. It becomes the little pieces of evidence that can help you to say, there are 15 people named John Brown. This is mine, right? Because I know that we always went to Point Hill Baptist Church. And so the people that are buried in Point Hill Baptist Church is my John Brown and not your John Brown. It's not a magic bullet, right? But there are traces and threads, and if we look a lot of the time, not all the time, we can find traces across and help to kind of reweave that tapestry that takes us back in time to say who we are. Because who we are matters, right? Who we are matters. It's not just about somebody who comes from somewhere else and says, we don't matter except as muscle. Who we are matters. Personally, I am tracing on every single line of my ancestry. And on every single line of my ancestry, there are white people and there are black people. The fact of very light brown skin does not mean they are not there, right? As a cousin of mine who is a scientist tells me, chromosomes do not work like that. You think that only color matters because of the chromosomes. It's not like how it works. I can trace right now on my father's side, his grandfather's grandmother was an African woman on Golden Vale Estate in Portland, right? She had children with a white man from probably Berrysdale Estate, also in Portland. They had 5 children. One of them was my great-great-great-grandfather's mother, right? Sometimes you can find it, sometimes you can't find it. Where am I finding her? I'm finding her in slave returns, right? It's the same on my mother's side. I found my 4 times great-grandfather. He was a light-skinned man born on Richmond Hill Plantation in St. James in 29. 6 years, 8 years, 9 years before emancipation, right? Sorry, 18. Beg your pardon. Losing it. People are there. They're there on every side. It's not, I think we tend to paint one color, right? It's more complicated than that. The fact of the matter is that the majority of people who were enslaved were black, right? There's so many stories. The first guy I ever had anything to do with on Who Do You Think You Are was horrified to discover that his free black 4 or 5 times great-grandfather was a slave owner. He owned 2 people who worked on his property. That is how people did business. Back in the 17 and 1800s, that is how people did business. It don't matter what color you are. There were plenty of black people who owned people. There were maroons who owned people. There were far more white people who owned people. But it was all across the board. So when you look in, don't close your eyes in terms of what you're looking for. Don't make too many assumptions about what you're looking for, right? As I said, there is some information out there. Look wherever it is possible, but start with who you have, right? Start with the family Bible, if it's there, that have things written in the front. Start with your grandmother and the stories they know. And talk to these people before they get too old and start forgetting, and before they die. And all of a sudden you want to know, and you have a question and there's nobody to answer it. So, write it all down. There are clues. It's a puzzle. Get all the clues you can. It'll help you in finding your way through. I hope that helps.
All right, guys, so Q&A is over. Sorry, anybody online want to ask a question, you can still send it in. But anybody, if you have any lingering things afterwards, just pounce on the presenters outside. I give you permission. It's okay. So, because we have refreshments for you, and we would like you to, stay alive. So, because I see some of you look well hungry. So, please, and cold. So, to wake one up. So, please, teachers, though, I'm asking if the teachers can lead out the students. St. Hilda's teacher, where are you? Miss? Where's St. Hilda? Ah, okay, good. STGC, where's the teacher? Okay, good times. Okay, good stuff, guys. Okay. And thanks for coming, everyone.
sugarcane, is a crop that was instrumental in shaping the foundation of many countries. Sugar, the bittersweet taste of past and present, is an exhibition that explores the depths of the sugarcane industry in Jamaica. It is a journey filled with different chapters of how deeply the industry was entrenched in the island society